a little closer to the door to listen. It seemed like the daughter was very upset to hear that she would have a tutor. The father just said he was leaving, and she would tell him herself that she didn't want lessons anymore. You could see the shock on Mr. Diakshil's face when he realized that, upon opening the door, he had hit the boy's face. Since his daughter could also see the scene, as the door was still open. But they also gave him a cold compress pack to put on his head. Apologies were made, and it wasn't anyone's intention to hurt him. They also offered him a plate of sliced fruit. Just like Diakshil, the lady of the house was also surprised by his weight loss. Finally, Jong Sang-woon was at their house to teach the daughter. So, he started a conversation with Miss Hyeon. It was inevitable that she was a little embarrassed. Jong Sang-woon introduced himself, and to confirm, asked if Hyeon was interested in entering Jeongguk University. Intending to keep it brief, she simply affirmed. What would come next would be more awkward, as she would have to show her grades to start the lesson. Even so, she went to get her grades. Based on her performance, she had average grades. The attention shifted to what would be said next. Seeing an opening, Mr. Diakshil used work as an excuse to leave. Under this pretext, the head of the family quickly left. Jong, having reviewed the results of her activities, and noticing the young lady's shyness, pointed out that when he took the aptitude test, he didn't get a good result either. Thus, he managed to ease her embarrassment. Given her good mood, he declared that they would do their best. After finishing the tutoring and heading home, he realized there was a long way to go with that young lady. Moreover, in the following days, he also gave more lessons. Hyeon was giving it her best. A while later, he realized she was smarter than he had expected. Since the number one wasn't there, it was concluded that he had gone to work. He thought about the phone issue. For now, one clone had gotten it, but if the number of clones increased, things could get complicated. He decided to go online to look for skills related to what he had. Then he found a page offering a familiar summoning ability for 100 million won, and another offering a telepathy skill scroll for 400 million won. However, he thought that if he had that much money, he would rather buy a house than a skill. Given that scenario, he realized it would take an eternity to buy just one of those abilities, since his balance was much lower. In the end, he was quite upset and decided to lie down for a bit, since he needed to become a hunter. With this in mind, he began to look for reports about hunters, since his ability was too good to just let him do manual labor. In order to become a hunter, he excitedly grabbed his yellow coat. An incident, which was called a great disaster by the world's population, disappeared, and it seemed like humanity would go extinct. Nowadays, people who hunt the remaining monsters are called hunters. For this, it was necessary to pass a test and receive a nationally recognized license. However, he would need some tips to pass the hunter test. A while later, he arrived at a place called the Hunter Association. In any case, he knew it was due to the vitality he had unlocked, but he felt better after sleeping for just a few hours. The presence of many hunters of various levels was notable. This was quickly noticed by Jong. Not to mention there were many people waiting to take the test. In the meantime, it was announced that registration for the hunter's license test, which was happening in the basement, would close in 20 minutes. With all that, attention was rising. In front of the hunter license room, he knocked and opened the door, surprised to find many people there. His only thought was, why were there so many people in that place? In fact, he managed to draw the attention of some of the competitors to himself, not to mention that firm footsteps were being heard. Suddenly, Han Myung-hwan arrived, introducing himself as a Class C hunter, who would also be the inspector for that test. It was said that the license test was composed of 3 exams, 1 written, 1 practical, and 1 for aptitude. Also, the exam could only be taken once a year. The officials never forgot about cheaters. The pressure was intense. When it was announced that the hunter license test had begun, driving and talking with the earphones connected, the driver was receiving instructions from the boss, but he didn't seem to agree. The boss was not very patient. The person driving was an employee of the JM agency. Like Jong, he was also having financial problems. Moreover, he was keeping an eye on the time when the hunter exam would end. He was still on his way, although the results had already been released. That surprising result caught many off guard. Many said the test was strangely easy. Jung Sang-woon wanted to know how that could be. Since the questions were easy, it was just a matter of memorizing a few things. They also gave enough time to practice. The target was very close. As for the aptitude test, it was like a moral test from elementary school. For a job that involved risking one's life and using weapons, it was very easy. It was as if the government wanted people to do it, but he didn't want to think too much about it either. Right at the exit, he noticed a guild. They were there trying to recruit hunters. Suddenly, one of the representatives congratulated him for passing the hunter license exam. He was offered a card from the JM agency. Kang Junmo was considering the possibility of, every time he bought an item or looked for a monster to hunt. While listening to that JM agency promotion, the status window seemed to have changed. It brought information about changes in his status, with the number of clones he could summon increasing to 2. Aware of that information, he informed the agent that he would contact them at another time. After driving to that place to find some work, he found himself talking to himself but hoped to be remembered by that young man, who was already at home, prepared to do another cloning. After creating another clone, he was eager to see the work of number 2. With a group of 3 individuals, they were prepared to become hunters. In the meantime, the agent had already managed to distribute most of the business cards. He also hoped they would contact him. He was heading toward the Haeseong Guild, the number 1 in Korea. Indeed, he would have to accept the value as per the agreement that was on the list. Kang Junmo, just by looking, realized that something was strange on the list. Looking at all the lists, the values seemed odd. However, that strangeness caused discomfort to the person who was giving that opportunity. He had to hear that he needed to be more shrewd. If they followed the rules and did everything they should, what would remain would be the profits. They also told him not to be so sensitive about the guild's business. Even though he opposed all that, he had to remain silent and leave. If he had known he would have such a hard time like that, he would have stayed quiet. He paid attention to the phone that was ringing. After answering, he identified himself and then heard that the young man who took the card from him, Jong Sangwoon, wanted to meet him. The meeting was set in a cafe, and upon arrival, he noticed he was already being awaited. He apologized for being late and ordered something to drink. While drinking iced coffee, Jong expressed his intentions of wanting to go to a safe place for beginners to hunt. Next, he asked about his ability, and the response was that it was cloning. Like other people, he formed his own opinion. Already with his preconception about the cloning ability, thinking they couldn't do anything physically, he had to reconsider his judgment, saying he thought the ability was amazing, and handed over the contract. He also mentioned the first hunting ground he would recommend, saying it wasn't dangerous. Seeing that it wouldn't be a problem, this caused some satisfaction in the client. He knew there was also a second hunting ground where it was possible to hunt for a long time. He concluded by saying there were other lower-class monsters, like giant rats. Jong Sangwoon, analyzing the 2 places, decided they were ideal for him. He also liked the selling rate of the items he would collect. In that way, he showed that he wanted to continue with that contract. Since he liked both locations, he was asked to choose one of them. However, he wouldn't choose just one. With that, the real Jung Sangwoon was introduced alongside the clone. So, it was he who signed the contract. The whole situation felt a bit strange. For better performance, he decided he would spend time at both locations. Since the real Jung Sangwoon had joined the conversation, the agent was quite impressed. Moreover, he was hearing that he wanted to hunt in both places. All of this reminded him of the past, when he had the chance to meet someone with the cloning ability. At that time, it seemed like something very remarkable. That was when he asked to see a demonstration. It was essential to focus. Next, other images identical to the original appeared. That performance was outstanding. In the face of that splendid ability, the agent was very impressed. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the clones of that individual began preparing for a combined attack. This made the agent quite scared. Then, the attack began. In no way could he believe what he was seeing. Shortly after, he realized they were illusions, far from being real clones. Even so, he thought he could touch them, but his hand passed through the emptiness of that illusion. However, it caused no real damage. The individual thought his ability would be great for drawing the monster's attention. At that moment, the agent concluded that he had seen enough of that ability. At present, he realized that the ability he saw the other time was infinitely different. After observing Jung Sangwoon's clone, he noticed that his clone was special, because he hadn't realized it was a clone when he looked at the contract, not even when he was drinking coffee. It was the first time seeing an ability like that. It was so hard to believe that he decided to ask if they were twins. However, he just found that question very funny. It seemed reasonable for the agent to think that way. After putting his arm around the number 1's shoulder, he confirmed that it was his clone. He also mentioned having another clone, which at that moment was at the gym. Likewise, this caused surprise. He didn't have the information that clones could increase muscle mass. Jong stated that he grew stronger as the clone did. He confessed that he even increased his stats by using the clone. Now, the agent was convinced that this wasn't the ability of a mere Class F hunter. By the way, going back to the hunting field, there was still a doubt, which was whether it would be a problem for the same person to enter different places at the same time. The agent thought it would be difficult to enter at the same time, because there was a record of each individual's entry. However, hearing those words wasn't satisfying. He had a solution to that problem and would talk to the Hunters Association about that fact. A demonstration of his ability would only be possible the following night. So, a meeting at the Hunters Center was scheduled for 2 days later. The contract was mentioned. However, it had already been stamped. When the agent suddenly stood up, he startled his client. But he was just excited about his cooperation. An agreement was made between them. Both were satisfied. 2 days later, Jong was waiting in front of the mentioned building. Upon arriving, Agent Junmo soon greeted the hunter. By the way, the hunter had arrived early. He had, in fact, hurried so as not to make the agent wait, and also because he was eager to see the association inside the hunter's center. Shortly after a ticket was issued, the hunters were called to the counter according to their number. When his turn came, he was asked if he wanted double access to the hunting field. Only this way would he make better use of his ability, as another bracelet was needed for the clone. Therefore, the request for the double access document was taken to the chief. After a while, paperwork was handed over, which would have to be submitted to the civil service office and then a test taken. The amount of paperwork shocked both of them. Agent Junmo, being kind, offered to handle the paperwork while Jong headed to the demonstration room. They went on to fulfill their respective tasks. Concentration was needed to successfully complete that action. Although he had done that maneuver a few times and knew what he was doing. Even so, it was embarrassing to see his copy undressed in front of the woman conducting the test. Only after passing the test could a bracelet be produced for the clone. The request for an identical identification bracelet had been completed, thus giving the clones freedom to enter the hunting areas, making simultaneous entries and exits possible. And wherever the original entered, the clones could enter as well. The engineer expressed clear interest in the clone. However, the clone was taken by the original, who was now in possession of the bracelet. It was certainly a shame, as the engineer probably had great ideas for the clone to carry out. Feeling quite accomplished, he showed his arm and announced that the authentication was already done. Finally, all the preparations for the solo hunt were ready. Agent Junmo asked if he was already heading to the hunting field, and that was the plan since his schedule was free. There was some curiosity about why number 2 was wearing a mask, especially since many people were interested in him. They were being observed by someone. The master of the Hai Sung Guild, Shin Hai-sung, wanted to know who it was and realized it was Junmo. To get his attention, he shouted loudly, calling Agent Kang Junmo by name. After that, he made a dramatic entrance, jumping from above and landing nearby. That man seemed to know Junmo and remarked that they were meeting there as well. In fact, Mr. Shin Hai-sung is a very well-known person. It was quite surprising to learn that Junmo was still in the hunting business. Jong Sang-woon also knew that man. Mr. Junmo didn't seem very comfortable with his presence. Even so, he greeted him, respecting the hierarchy. That situation brought some good laughs to the guild master. He stopped out of curiosity about the presence of that boy. At that moment, the young man was introduced as a hunter from the association. Looking at the boy in the hoodie, he said he understood. Also, by looking at his physique, he could tell he was a rank F. Trying to stay serious, that man asked what had happened to Mr. Junmo, who used to supervise C and D ranks. Immediately after, laughing a lot, he couldn't believe he was now looking after a rank F dressed in a hoodie like that. Mr. Junmo wasn't feeling well. Shortly after, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was his protege, there to offer support. However, that man was very satisfied with making fun of Mr. Junmo. Even in the presence of that individual trying to impose his greatness, the young hunter didn't let his presence diminish. He put on a happy face and showed his kindness. He said how honored he was to meet the master of the number 1 guild in the country. Those words pleased the master, and he even started to see the young man differently. Taking the opportunity, the young man listed the man's achievements. Shin Hai-sung is number 1 in the Monopoly of Dungeons and also first place in the restriction of hunting grounds, among other facts. He knew he had no idea what to do standing before someone so notorious. The master acknowledged the young hunter's courage. After all, that man has a very strong presence, with the goal of testing the hunter's ability, to see if it was as good as his courage. Jong just looked back, noticing the presence of that man close to him. He was definitely very lucky because, at that moment, that man's assistant arrived looking for him. He could tell the assistant was there, and they couldn't keep doing as they pleased. He just said goodbye to them, but he still wanted one last thing, which was to know the young hunter's name. Jong Sang-woon was quite clever and asked the man to find out for himself. The guild master acknowledged that the young man was somewhat amusing and said goodbye to Mr. Junmo. The assistant was informing the master that he couldn't just walk around inside the association like that. Sometime later, inside Mr. Junmo's car, he thanked him for the courtesy shown earlier. Jong mentioned that he couldn't just stand by and watch. The relationship between Junmo and the Hai Sung Guild was conflicted, with just a simple search about the JM agency. But what he saw next caught his attention because there wasn't much information related to it online. While doing his research, he came across a rumor about Agent Kang Junmo, saying he had been fired from the Hai Sung Guild. Now it was clear why hunters didn't want to join the agency. It was due to fear of retaliation from the Hai Sung Guild. Junmo, hearing that information from Jong, was curious why he wanted to join that agency, simply because of the payment rate. Moreover, he could count on Junmo if there was something he couldn't handle in the industry or the guild. Those words made Mr. Junmo aware of his responsibility. However, at the gym, number 2 was training to failure and beyond. All that effort was making the gym manager very tense. Other people also felt uncomfortable just watching someone put in so much effort. In training, even though it was intense, the clone would do it without complaint. However, the phone in his pocket started ringing. A message from the original said to finish the training, take a shower, and then wait in front of the gym at 4 o'clock. Having received that order, he hydrated himself and went to carry out the rest of the command. The gym instructor was relieved when he noticed that the boy had stopped pushing himself so hard. The liquid dripping on the floor had the appearance of a hot air bubble. Only with the right equipment could someone endure being there. That effort was to fill the bench on his back. After completing that mission, he was already leaving the designated area. Jong was watching the effort he had to make. He reported that wearing the mask was quite difficult. That was why, even though the slime field was safe, hunters didn't go there. Jong knew he couldn't do it for too long. Junmo said he could hunt until the container was full, and when it was full, it could be replaced at the rented locker. However, there was a suit that helped a lot and could last longer. He wasn't sure if he could last 2 hours, let alone 6 hours. But if it were number 2 he could. And soon, he put on a mask and specific outfit. Number 2 also had Jong's support and encouragement. Now, he wanted to head to the horned rabbit hunting field next. He noticed that number 1 was missing. He also remembered that he hadn't picked up number 1 at the gym, who was waiting at the agreed spot. In the car, Jong was driving. He asked if Jong would continue calling the clones number 1 and number 2. He replied that, since they were identical, it would be confusing if they had names. The agent said that since they were clones, names weren't necessary. He just confirmed with Junmo whether they used weapons to hunt horned rabbits, to which he replied yes. He also wanted to know if he needed to prepare equipment. He was told that it wasn't necessary, as weapons could be rented at the hunting field. He also mentioned that one day he should have his own equipment. However, he was startled by a sound he heard. Junmo said that they had finally arrived at Yujangsan Field. The place was heavily guarded by security officers. You could see them everywhere, guiding the hunters. Jong said that the place was huge and couldn't even compare to the slime field. However, the agent said that was because that field was famous, as it was where a monster invasion had occurred. Thinking about it, Jong thought he had heard about that before. Basically, the portal was disconnected from the outside world. Junmo said that during the invasion, most of the strong monsters were defeated, and only Class F and E monsters remained. Jong asked if there wouldn't be any complaints about the noise. The two entered the hunting area. It was quite large and full of people. Pointing to a shop, Junmo said that Jong could rent equipment there. The vendor said that the rifle, night vision goggles, space rental, earplugs, and 400 rounds of ammunition would cost 700,000 won in total. Crying, Jong said that was a lot. Junmo said that most of the cost was for the ammunition, but that it would be reimbursed as he caught rabbits, which were worth the same as 1 bucket of slime. Looking at the map, Junmo said they would be on the 3rd floor of Building F. Jong said he didn't know the area was divided into sections. Junmo said they had arrived, and that was the spot they would use. Suddenly, a very loud noise startled Jong. There were many hunters in the area. Some were repeatedly missing their shots. Some had their prey in hand, and some had captured many. Jong was surprised to see them in action. Pulling him out of his shock, Junmo told him that his seat was number 4. He asked if Jong was confident in his shooting skills. Jong asked who he thought he was and said that he only missed 3 shots during the hunter exam. He said he felt sorry for the rabbits. He adjusted his gear and got ready. He said the rabbits wouldn't be able to escape the eagle eye of Yujangsan. Junmo was thankful that the others were wearing earplugs and couldn't hear that. Aiming, Jong spotted a rabbit. He told Junmo that he had found one. Aiming slowly to hit it, he placed his finger on the trigger and got ready. He felt sad for the horned rabbits. 3 hours later at the hunting field, Jong was desperate. He hadn't hit a single rabbit. He said it made sense that he hadn't succeeded. Everything was going fine with his aim, but they seemed to have heard some noise. After that, the rabbit fled. The moment he fired, the rabbit ran away. Even Junmo had left. He couldn't even earn back the money he had spent, and he wondered if he should call it a day. He called number 1 and asked him to hunt the horned rabbits. If he managed to catch one, he was to send a message saying 1, and if the bullets ran out, he should call. He sighed in exhaustion and said he was going home. Already at home, lying down, he checked the system for notifications of increased mana. He thought that at least number 2 was hunting slimes well. Looking at the status, he noticed they were steadily growing. He remembered when Shin Haesung bullied him, and said he still had a long way to go. As soon as he woke up, he thought that hunting rabbits had been a disaster. He hadn't expected it to be so difficult. Getting ready to sleep, he hoped that number 1 could at least catch 1 rabbit. While he was sleeping, the phone started to vibrate. Many messages from number 1 could be seen on the screen. The scene shifts to the next day. at the JM agency. The agent was calm, until he received a call. He answered, informing that it was JM agency. The person on the other end asked for confirmation if this was the agency to which Hunter Jong Sang-woo belonged. The person introduced himself as the manager of the slime hunting field and asked Mr. Junmo to come to the hunting field. He asked, not understanding why. The hunting field manager explained that Jong had been hunting for over 24 hours straight. In a hurry, Mr. Junmo said he would go to the hunting field as soon as he could. At Jong's house, he woke up peacefully. He checked his phone to see how Clone 1 was doing. Jong was stunned for a moment, not understanding how there could be so many messages. But he briefly reviewed the messages in disbelief. At the slime hunting field, Mr. Junmo seemed surprised by the number of slimes Jong had hunted. Many tanks were full of slime. Jong's clone had filled all the storage containers in just one day. The soldiers around were incredulous at such a feat. The clone was covered in slime. Mr. Junmo called to report the good result. Jong answered, seeming distracted. Excited, Mr. Junmo said that the clone was very efficient in hunting and that he could already stop the clone. Jong then said he was happy to know and asked if he could send the cleaners to the horned rabbit hunting field. Looking at the pile of horned rabbits, Jong said the monster carcasses were already almost blocking the path. The people around seemed surprised by the size of the pile. Some of them wanted to sneak away with some of the carcasses. Others wondered if he had really hunted all those horned rabbits by himself. Interested in such skill, a recruiter approached the clone. He quickly showed his business card. The recruiter asked Clone 1 if he was already part of a guild. Without orders to respond, Clone 1 simply ignored the recruiter. Trying to remain calm, the recruiter thought it was normal, and that most talented people were weird. Another recruiter nearby said it was useless to try. He pointed out that several other recruiters had tried to talk to Clone 1, but they were equally ignored, even those from big guilds. While the recruiters discussed, one of them quietly approached, handing more ammunition to Clone 1. After sending his clone to continue hunting and leaving Mr. Junmo to handle the carcasses, he praised the clone for the good work. The clone was very happy with the compliment. He quickly reloaded his rifle, and went back to hunting the horned rabbits. People seemed surprised by this. They realized they had underestimated the clone's potential, even receiving only 50% of the status, technically limited to just half of what Jong could do. The clones were like machines in terms of precision, with great focus and no hesitation in making decisions. While distracted, his student was calling him insistently. She asked Jong what he was thinking about so much. He just changed the subject, telling Hyeon that she had improved a lot, but she insisted on knowing what her teacher was thinking. Minimizing the situation, Jong just said he was thinking about how well he did in the hunting field. Hyeon was surprised and very excited to discover that her teacher was a hunter. He even said that he forgot to mention it, and that he was kind of a beginner. Interested in this fact, she asked Jong about the hunter who was at the top of the rankings, a new hunter nicknamed the God of Eagle Eye Shooting from Ujangsan, to which he replied he didn't know. Hyeon explained that this hunter was one of the most searched on the Hunter's Wiki that day, after he hunted over 200 rabbits. The hunter, being mysterious, was very cool for not saying a single word to anyone, and that mystery was the reason he was so popular. After watching the video they made of the mysterious hunter, however, he was surprised by the nickname. Hyeon told Jong that her dream was to be a hunter. Jong asked if she was awakened, to which she confirmed, adding that she had the license but was afraid to go to the hunting fields. She fell silent for a moment. Hesitantly, she asked Jong if he would take her hunting if she scored well on the test. Confidently, he said it was no problem, as long as she passed the university test. Very excited, Hyeon asked if he was serious, which he confirmed and explained that he knew of some safe hunting fields. She asked for a promise from him. Jong sighed for a moment, but made a pinky promise. She said he couldn't change his mind anymore. Leaving Hyeon's room, Jong ran into Hyeon's mother. She asked if the lesson had gone well, and he replied that it had. The student, curious to hear what was being said, pressed herself close to the door. He said goodbye and was about to leave, but Hyeon's mother asked if he wanted to eat before going, and he said he had to go somewhere. Still listening behind the door was Hyeon. Very happy, Hyeon threw herself onto the bed, thinking that she had an appointment with Jong. She said to herself that he was a hunter, and thanks to that, the conversation had gone well. She hadn't liked it at first since he was an acquaintance of her father, but his image was pleasing. He felt good and taught well, and he had an honest look. Besides, she thought he was handsome. She didn't even understand it herself, so she would study hard to impress him. Already at the horned rabbit hunting base, Jong was taking the elevator, wondering if they had already collected the rabbit corpses. Junmo was surprised by Jong's arrival. Jong asked if he was there too. Junmo replied yes, because he had to check the collection process, and asked where Jong had been, to which Jong replied that he had been tutoring. Junmo said he had called many collection teams before, but never so many at once. A total of 352, and a lot of people. Junmo asked if he had checked the payment yet, but Jong said he hadn't because he had turned off notifications. On the phone screen, the bank balance showed 32,720,301. Shocked, Jong looked at the phone in disbelief. He asked if that amount was really correct. Junmo replied that since his hunting skills were very good, he had raised the payment to that of a rank E hunter. Jong thanked him and said he wasn't even rank E yet. Suddenly, a guy caught their attention, making everyone look at him, as they wanted to know what he was up to. The man asked Junmo if he was the manager while pointing at number 1. Junmo replied yes and asked who the man was. He said he was a hunter whose prey had been stolen. He said all the horned rabbits he had targeted had been stolen. He demanded they pay for his losses. Sweating, Junmo wondered what to do. He told Jong that he thought they had chosen the wrong place, and Jong replied that he didn't even know people like that existed. Jong stood there thinking. Suddenly, he said he had an idea, and Junmo asked what it was. The man asked what they were whispering about. The man said he wasn't mean and only wanted 10% of the total payment. Jong laughed at what the man said. Irritated, the man asked what he was laughing at. Jong told him to relax because that guy wouldn't be coming back there for a few days. He said they should go, but the man, angry, asked where they were going. Junmo also asked where they were going, and Jong replied they were heading to a nearby cafe. Furious, the man turned around and tried to punch Jong, shouting at him not to ignore him. But Jong ordered number 1 to jump in front. Number 1 jumped in front of the punch. He took the punch head-on and went flying far away, hitting many obstacles along the way, until he crashed into a building pillar. He probably got injured after colliding with several things along the way. The man, in shock, said he hadn't punched that hard. Filming a video, Jong called the man evil, drawing attention to him. Jong asked Junmo if people would let such an act of violence pass in the sacred hunting ground, to which Junmo replied they wouldn't. The man tried to deny what he had done, but everyone had seen it. Jong said it would be really bad if the video were uploaded to the Hunter web. He needed to do something about that video, as it could damage his and the guild's reputation. Asking if he was right, Jong placed a hand on the man's shoulder, and told the man to go his own way. The man agreed but remained very angry. Life went on. Jong wanted to know if he was from the Haisung Guild. Junmo said that's exactly it, and that he thought the man was from the Haisung Guild. Jong asked if there were people like that in the Haisung Guild, and Junmo replied that since the guild was big, there were all kinds of people. But how did Jong know the man was from the Haisung Guild? Junmo said that ever since they had arrived at the hunting field, the man had been watching them. He said this must be the work of the Haisung Guild. Jong said it must be revenge. Junmo said that Jong was right. They must have thought that number 1 was another hunter who had made a contract with him. He said that even before hiring, the hunters from JM Agency were already being harassed. JM Agency hunters don't last long and just leave, and currently, only a few rank F hunters remain. He added that, even now, he couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be sabotage from the Haisung Guild. Jong said he already knew that, even before teaming up with him, so there was no need to worry, as he wouldn't betray him. Image without text. Jong said he wasn't just going to let them threaten him, and mentioned that he had a plan to get stronger quickly. He began to explain the details of his plan. However, the agent thought it all sounded very dangerous, but he continued listening to each dangerous detail of the plan. Jong asked what he thought of the plan. Junmo said he had never thought of it that way, and asked if 2 p.m. was good. Jong replied that it was perfect. He then said they would meet at the Hunter's Market. The Monster Hunter's Market, which deals with weapons and other parts and equipment for hunters, has always been active since the emergence of the Awakened. But a type of department store entered the Hunter's Market and took over part of that industry, because they had all the equipment a hunter could want. He equips a set of armor, while the store owner explains that it was titanium armor and would certainly protect against monster attacks. After saying it was light and comfortable, he turned his attention to the dagger, and pointed out that since he would mainly fight using weapons, that titanium dagger was good enough. Needing more equipment for the clones, he asked for 2 more sets of that armor, which the store owner quickly prepared. Shifting focus, he asked Jong if he needed some abilities, to which Jong confirmed. Mr. Junmo also asked about familiar abilities, though he didn't expect to find them there. Even so, they searched one of the shops. They looked at some ability orbs, looking closely to find a suitable ability. Jong found a good ability. Upon checking the description further, he noticed the high price of the ability orb. That hefty price left Jong frustrated. Somewhat embarrassed, he asked Mr. Junmo for an advance. A bit reluctantly, Mr. Junmo said he could lend up to 50 million won at that moment. Jong said that was helpful and that he could handle the rest of the amount in installments. Mr. Junmo told him not to worry because, if everything went according to plan, they could recover the money quickly. Back at his house, Jong analyzed the orb for a while. Then he studied the instruction manual. To acquire the ability contained in the orb, it was necessary to infuse mana into it or press a button. He opted for the activator button, as he didn't have control over mana. So, he placed his hand on the orb. He looked at it hesitantly for a brief moment. Slowly, he pressed the activator button. A blinding light radiated from the orb, and intensified until it covered the entire room. The familiar ability was successfully created. The power of the ability was to share senses with the chosen target. Jong looked at his own hands for a moment, until he noticed that the ability orb had disappeared, having been used. He simply clenched his fists in anticipation to test his new skill. He immediately summoned his clones 1 and 2, who promptly appeared to answer his call. Still equipped in their new armor, he called his clones to test the new ability together. Later, he met with Mr. Junmo to say that he had an idea to get stronger more quickly. Jong asked what he thought of the hunting results. Mr. Junmo obviously said the results were excellent and far exceeded expectations. However, he emphasized the clone's exceptional dexterity, energy, and reaction, which produced an outcome he had never imagined. He even mentioned a recent incident where Jong ordered the clone to take a punch from another hunter and react. Not only did the clone have perfect reaction time, but it could have defeated the other hunter. The question was if he meant that, even with low stats, a clone had great body control. Jong confirmed and said he would use that to his advantage. A bit confused, Mr. Junmo asked how he planned to do that. Jong began explaining that, first, he needed 2 places. Training grounds to practice his close-range and long-range combat skills. One clone would enroll in hand-to-hand combat classes. The other clone would go to a shooting range to practice skeet shooting. And of course, he would take the clones' training to the next level so they could surpass their limits. They would skip the theoretical and go straight to practice. In the combat classes, the instructor showed how to disarm an opponent, while the shooting instructor was teaching trap shooting. Clone 1 would go directly to duel with the instructor, and Clone 2 would practice trap shooting with a pistol. Each of the clones was ready to begin training, Clone 1 with his batons and Clone 2 with a real pistol. Both clones were completely calm. The training began at the command of the instructors. Clone 1 disarmed the opponent almost instantly. Meanwhile, Clone 2 hit the target with ease, surprising their respective instructors without showing any expressions. Jong summarized by telling Mr. Junmo that he needed the familiar skill. Mr. Junmo didn't understand why. After all, it was a skill to share vision with pets. What would he do with that? Jong added that all senses were shared through the skill, and all sensations would be connected. And he told Mr. Junmo to imagine Jong using the skill while the clones were fighting or practicing shooting. Then, he simply focused. He activated the familiar skill while concentrating. The skill was triggered, connecting the senses between him and his clones. At that moment, he could experience everything his clones were feeling. So, he connected with Clone 1. From Clone 1's heightened concentration, to the ideal distance during the fight, the angle of his joints, the balance of his body, Jong felt Clone 1 dodging. He continued feeling the movement and the flow of force. With Clone 2, he could feel the breathing during the shot, the aim and the direction of his vision, how to hold the weapon correctly, the control of the weapon's recoil and everything else. He could feel all the movements of his clones in their entirety. Jong slowly opened his eyes. He had felt every sensation of his clones, and now he could access all their senses. From that moment on, he would have all the information gathered by the clones. He could now have everything they could offer, all by using that item. He could already see the first results, and the experiences he had just had. He felt the air pressure as the baton passed by the clone, even the smell of gunpowder and the force of the recoil, including the fatigue that was now affecting him. Even though he hadn't moved, everything was being done by the clones, simply by sharing the senses. After having experienced the same movements as the clones, and having the same body, he was already able to imitate their movements in that moment. He also improved his stats. Seeing the results, he decided to try both fighting and shooting, and by connecting with number 1, he could see who he was fighting against. After focusing, he activated the familiar skill. That way, he could connect with the clones, who were in other places. One clone was fighting. It was a tough lesson. The instructor, seeing him watching the clone, could see strength in him too. The students were confused when the trainer personally decided to fight against the clone. The two were ready to start the fight, with sharp movements and a lot of determination. The instructor noticed that his attacks lacked experience, but the defense was different. He was reading the movements and dodging the attacks perfectly. Noticing this, the instructor started to push harder. He took advantage of his good defense to attack. The clone, in that way, showed a lot of strength. There was a moment when the clone began to follow the same strategy the trainer was using. Thus, he also started attacking. At that moment, it could be said that he was copying the trainer's movements. This way, the instructor could push even harder, as the clone could defend himself. The blows were becoming more powerful. Even so, the clone managed to dodge, leaving all the other students astonished. More and more, the clone advanced on the instructor, even managing to land some hits. For a moment, it made the instructor a bit uncomfortable. He felt pressured, since the opponent was confident he could land a hit. The trainer saw an opening and the counterattack was ready. Because of that, the clone's attack had no effect. Not even understanding what was happening, he suffered a counterattack that was executed masterfully. The instructor went hard on him. The other students knew that the trainer was an exceptional person. All the results of the fight were transmitted to the original body in real time. The trainer, with a smile, found the situation dangerous. He asked the clone if he wanted to continue. Zhang asked number 1 if he was okay. At that moment, he just gained momentum and repeated the jump the trainer had done a moment ago. It seemed that all his movements were impressive. This left his opponent surprised. Zhang also found his clone quite bold. After jumping, he stopped in front of the trainer and asked him to accept another round of fighting. However, this made his trainer proud. After that result, he moved on to number 2's experience. He concentrated to connect with him. However, he was target shooting. A guy was feeling full of himself after apparently hitting his target. Even his partner celebrated. As soon as Zhang started to join that experience, he realized number 2 was even shooting at the clay targets of the person next to him. However, he would just focus on the shooting. He shared the same sensations, with the upper body stable. He asked him not to move and only rotate in the direction, following the target's trajectory. When the aim and the supposed trajectory aligned, he asked him to remember every little detail. Zhang was determined to take advantage of all the opportunities created by the clones. To get his own movements confirmed again, he needed to focus. However, all the effort of switching between the clones was becoming exhausting. He realized his mana was depleted. He started to feel dizzy and asked everyone to rest. The movements of the clones were intense, so they neither hesitated nor feared anything. Next time, he would go with them because he wanted to test what would happen if he tried himself. Heian spotted Zhang from afar and immediately called out to him. Since he wasn't expecting her, it was a surprise. He even became worried about her being out late at night, but she was just studying at the library. He thought it was a lie, but she insisted that she had already done her homework. Some rough-looking guys were talking about Zhang. They seemed to be waiting for him. Meanwhile, someone was following Kang Zhenmo and reporting on what was happening. He apologized, saying he was trying to intimidate, but it turned out someone was recording. The person on the phone was trying to explain, but the person on the other end wasn't pleased at all. Despite saying he would figure it out, the person gave new orders to stay away from the Yujangsan field. The instructions were that, even if something happened, it had nothing to do with the Haisung Guild. It was also said that he would only be seen as a street thug. And then the call ended. After that, the man became very angry and threw the phone against the wall. After the phone hit the wall and fell to the floor, he began stomping on it. He didn't seem content and now wanted to deal with the situation. The leader wanted to know what had happened and why he was upset this time. It had been a while since they last saw each other, and he even put on a friendly face. He wanted to know why he hadn't done anything, just let it go. Even though he had left there to join the number 1 guild in the country. Since the guild didn't want him to get too close to the hunting field, they needed to know if there was still work for him there. They talked among themselves and were willing to find some work for him. They were chatting when a scene on the other side of the street caught his attention. It was Zhang and his student talking. The man recognized the young man from recording the video. It was possible he was looking to settle things. He watched from a distance, and his companion asked if that was the boy. Sitting there, relaxed, Zhang was talking to Heian,